Hi folks, and welcome to episode 10 of Dime a Dozen. My name is Jason Moore with MTGOacademy.com, and welcome to this deck tech. We've actually just finished the daily event, and we're going to go over some of the card choices in the deck. This is the Golgari Monsters deck that I wrote about in my last episode. And first of all, I want to just thank everybody for watching the videos, reading the articles. We made it to 10 episodes. I'm very happy for that, the big 1-0. So hopefully we can continue to provide some entertaining stuff for you, and I love all the feedback you guys have been giving me. Please continue to do so. So this is Golgari Monsters, very fun deck, and it has quite a bit of efficiency and aggression against a number of opposing controlling strategies. I've noticed is something that I like playing this deck against because there are so many threats that are hard to deal with. So let's start and look at the lands. We are playing 4 swamps and 18 forests, and that might seem pretty abysmal if you're just looking at that objectively, but we actually have 12 total sources of black mana between Elves of Deep Shadow and Borderland Ranger. So 4 swamps is nice. I like having a plethora of forests so that we ensure we get a turn 1 green elf at the beginning of the game for every single game. That is one of the big things about this deck, is that you want to always have a turn 1 accelerator. So speaking of those, we're playing 10 of them. That's also going to help ensure that we've got one every single game, because the curve of this deck actually really goes from 1 to 3 to 4. So turn 1 is an elf, turn 2 is a 3-drop, turn 3 is a 4-drop. That's pretty much the ideal way that this deck pans out. So we're playing 4 Llanowar Elves, very straightforward, just a turn 1/1/1 accelerator. We're playing 2 Finehorn Elves, which is also the exact same as Llanowar Elves, same creature type, same stats, same ability. So you could play 4 of this and 2 of the Llanowar if you want, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I had 10 of these effects. And then the other one we're playing, which needs to be a 4 of, is Elves of Deep Shadow, because it adds black to your mana pool. So what you want, it makes these other creatures and spells splashable in this deck, but also accelerates you. It does do some damage, but most of the time we're going to be attacking very early, so the damage we take is not that relevant. And moving on to the 2-drop is mostly going to be removal. We're playing 4 Doomblade, and Doomblade is a very splashable, very efficient removal spell that hits a lot of creatures in the format, big or small. It doesn't hit black creatures, but there is not a lot of black in the format, and the black decks that exist I don't find to be very problematic. In my opinion, something like Mono Black Control is going to need a lot of edict effects to stop us, which they do have, and they have a lot of blockers, so maybe it ends up being a tougher matchup than I think. But we also have another removal spell that we can use against them, which is 4 Echoing Decay, and this is a way not only to get 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s, but also can win you the game against Empty the Warren. So it's good to have here. It's nice to have these 8 removal spells against a lot of the other creature decks, because we can stabilize early, remove a couple guys, and then just play out our big threats and try and close out the game. And then 4 Putrid Leech. So this is our only 2-drop creature. Doesn't always come down on turn 2, but he can easily do so with an Elves of Deep Shadow or a Swamp in hand. And it's just another guy that's going to do a lot of damage compared to his mana cost. So he's aggressively costed, a 2-drop that can attack for 4. It is going to deal damage to us, which is a little problematic. Between tapping the Elves of Deep Shadow and activating this, sometimes can drain our life a lot, but you have to just use your best judgment with this guy. Onto the 3-drops, we've got the Centaur. Sounds like a lot of you guys are not a big fan of him, but I have to question how many of you have actually played the card, because there's very few things in the format that kills this, and there's not a lot that blocks it either. So yes, I understand that it's not very big, it's not a fast clock, but just landing this on turn 2 and getting in for however much damage is usually pretty good for the deck's game plan. Again, this is a cohesive, all-encompassing game plan. It's not about any one creature winning the game. We've got 3 Borderland Ranger, another great turn 2 that does two things. It fixes our colors so we get black and green. And then it also ensures that we have that extra land to hit our 4-drops, which the 4-drops are the biggest creatures, biggest threats in the deck. And it doesn't get bigger than Blastoderm. 5/5 for 4 mana with Shroud. It's great stats, incredibly well costed. The only downside is that you get this guy temporarily. You get him for 3 turns. He gets to attack 3 times essentially, and sometimes he can be chumped to the extent where you don't really do a lot of damage with him. But if you're doing that, then you're removing 2 or 3 creatures for the cost of this guy and keeping them from attacking. So that's also good. A lot of times they'll let him go through, which could be a mistake for them, because we have enough big creatures that once our board is established, we can swing for massive amounts of damage in a single turn. And then for Primal Hunt Beast, which is a 3/3 hexproof, so a better hill giant than we're used to seeing. But this deck doesn't really abuse him very well because we're not playing equipment, pump spells, or rancors or auras or whatever, and that might change. We might actually phase this guy out of the deck for some other creature, or we might actually start bringing in some buffs to make him bigger. He's been alright so far. Requires at least a couple blockers usually, but I'm not sold on this slot. I think some of the threats in the deck could be altered. I just haven't really found anything yet that has caught my eye enough to just snap replace. So this is the main deck here. It's very streamlined, as you can see. 30 creatures, 8 removal spells, 10 accelerators, and then lands. It's very focused, very specific game plan that you're doing. You play an elf on turn 1, and then you pump out threats, and then you attack them. And it's a kind of a race, but it's not completely non-interactive. It does interact with the opponent. So let's go on to the sideboard here. This is the very baseline, simplest sideboard I could have. I think this is definitely going to change over time. I would love some input on what you guys think we should do. Got 4 Fume Spitter. This is mainly to stop the faster decks, the faster aggressive decks. Infect. It's good because it puts a counter on the infect creature, so even if they boost the power and toughness, the counter will remain and the creature will die next turn anyway. Also, same thing for Stompy. So I think it's okay. It might be a bit overkill on removal, but I've been liking it so far because in those matchups, there's usually a creature that you can afford to board out because it's just not going to be as good. 3 copies of Gleeful Sabotage. This is going to hit Affinity, but also a number of other decks that play Golems and Serrated Arrows and things like that. I received a comment that this deck has a good matchup against Affinity. That's not always the case. At this point, I don't think there's enough data to really say what this deck has a good matchup against definitively, but I have found that Gleeful Sabotage is sometimes needed or really appreciated against that deck. But once again, I mean, this is worth inclusion because it hits artifacts and enchantments in any deck. So I don't think it's a bad call to have this in the sideboard. We're playing for Penumbra Spider, and this is really just to see how well this card will do against certain other opposing strategies. So sometimes we'll just board this in to replace the Hunt Beast and see how we like it. It's mostly to test this, but it's also a way for us to deal with flyers too. And it's pretty resilient to removal because it requires 2 removal spells to deal with it most of the time. And 4 Thermokarst to hit post and hit storm decks. We have a lot of removal main, and some of that could come out for these Thermokarsts. As you can see, a spoiler there, we did not win the tournament. But like I said, this will come into to play. It's a pretty effective strategy because we're attacking these decks on certain angles with the creatures, and then we're also restricting their mana. So that also gives them less time. And in this deck, we can resolve a Thermokarst on turn 2, which is very nice. So this is Golgari Monsters. It's time for the Monster Mash. I hope you guys are ready, and I hope you guys enjoy the games. Please give me any feedback you can, and we'll talk to you later. The games are coming up right now.